Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Welcome to Finding Certainty. This is Patrick Laing, and this is my favorite day of the week. I get to meet with interesting guests, with athletes and artists and entrepreneurs from all over the country. Today we have a special guest named EksAyn Anderson, and I got to tell you, I'm very excited about his foundation that he's spearheading. You're going to hear a little bit about his story, but also what he's doing to create more certainty in the lives of our kids. He's got a foundation called Dadfluence. It's a movement, I guess you could call it, and it's been a long time coming. So, EksAyn, thanks for being on the call with us today here on Finding Certainty. I appreciate it.
Patrick, thanks for having me. And just to be clear, at this point, it's not a foundation yet, but it is a movement. You're absolutely right. It's a movement to try to help fathers. So thank you for introducing that.
100%. Well, we're going to get into what it is, how it works, what it's doing. I think it's just a brilliant idea. Like I said, it's a long time coming. I mean, we know that there's a decline in America and around the world in good fatherhood, good and strong and enduring fatherhood. And it's so important. I don't think anyone would disagree that having a strong mother, strong father in the house is the most important thing in children's lives. And so we're going to get into that. I always like to start the show out just by sharing two reasons why I've invited this guest. I guess I could share just one, but it's my show, so I share two. First and foremost is you are a fantastic speaker. I mean, you go around and with your career and your job, which we're going to talk about, you've spoken all over the country. You do a lot of public speaking. I think you've got some really powerful ideas that we can share with our audience today. The second piece, though, is this Dadfluence movement. I think it's really important. And if we're talking about certainty and finding certainty, creating certainty in our lives, in our families, I mean, it all starts at the top, right? It starts with the parents and trickles down from there. I mean, we've seen great examples. We've seen really atrocious examples and everything in between. And what you've put together in our spearheading, I think, really has the ability to make a difference. And so, again, thanks for being on the call. Looking forward to diving into it a little bit together.
Thank you, Patrick, so much for having me on your show. It's an honor to be on your show.
Absolutely. So let's start out by getting to know you a little bit. Who is EksAyn Anderson, and maybe a little bit about where you grew up and what you do as a career. Tell us a little bit about your family as well, if you don't mind. Just as I always say, we go down a little bit of a stroll down memory lane to understand who you are and what brought you to where you are today.
Thanks, Patrick. First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. I've got 5 wonderful children, and I am so grateful to have them in my life. Obviously, I also have a career where one of my jobs as a dad is to provide for my family. And so I have kind of a secondary career where you mentioned it. I like to speak and present. And so one of the things I do for my work is to try to help people learn how to influence others for good. How do you influence others ethically, honestly, and powerfully? And that's a key component when you're trying to have leadership in a company or sales or customer service. Think, how do we ethically and honestly get people to do good things? And what I've tried to do is let me just tell you this. Most of the problems we see, Patrick, in the world, most of the problems we see have their root in places maybe where you wouldn't expect. So when we look at problems, and I'm jumping a little bit here, but when we look at problems in the world where we see violence or we see corruption or we see dishonesty or we see all kinds of things, most of those problems can be traced back. And so a while ago, I felt really strongly that we need to try to influence dads. How do we influence fathers and mothers, parents, families for good? Because that's where the good stuff starts. And that's also where the problems can get really intense if we don't help them. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, I grew up in the Rocky Mountain area. I grew up in a large family with 8 children. I'm the second oldest. I have my mom died when I was 8 years old. I watched her die. And I've got to tell you that the little things that my mom did when I was young still profoundly affect me today. Little tiny things she said, little tiny things she did profoundly affect me today. And so I'm kind of in this unique spot to tell parents, you know what, the little tiny things you do will have a much, much more profound effect than you could possibly imagine. And I know it because there's things my mom did that are affecting my children who she never met and will affect their children and so on. And so being a parent really is the ultimate career. Thanks for asking, Patrick.
100%. You are known for influencing within your community, within your clients, the businesses you work with, et cetera, et cetera. You're an author. I want to talk a little bit about your book today, Key to the Gate. But to your point about influence that our parents have on us, right? I heard a funny story recently about a lady who every time she cooked her ham in the stove, she'd cut the end off of it, and she'd put it in the stove and cook it. And her husband said, and she'd been doing it for years, right? She said, "Why do you cut the end off the ham before you make it for our Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, Sunday dinner?" And she said, "That's how my mom did it." He goes, "I don't really know why she did it." She said, "Let me find out." She calls her mom up and she says, "Why do you always cut the end off the ham? I've been doing it. I don't even know why I do it." And her mom says, "Well, my pan was too short." And so
That's right.
It's funny how these traditions and this influence, right, gets passed down for good or for bad. That's kind of a funny example, but I completely agree. Your kids are going to have a piece of their grandmother in them, both genetically and through tradition, through principles, right? Even though they never met her. And I mean, imagine the impact that we have that is generational. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, great point. Great point, Patrick. And there really are things that are passed down that we don't even realize. Exactly to your point. Why do I cut the ham off? Because my mom did. Well, why did she cut it off? Because the pan was too short, right?
Yeah, it's funny. You're. I think so much of it comes down to principles. You have a podcast called the Principle Podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Are you still doing that, or do you?
I am. Yes, I am. I'm doing the Principle Podcast, and luckily, it's been successful enough that it's ranked on Listen Notes as top 10% in the globally. So it's doing well. And we talk about those kind of things.
So tell us about that. What is the Principle Podcast about?
Well, let's talk about this for a little bit. This is a great question. Thank you, Patrick. Let me give you an example. In the world it is so important to understand principles. And let me give you an example. There's the principle of gravity. Gravity works where I'm at. It works where you're at. It works on the other side of the world. It works where every listener is listening right now. They're held to the earth by gravity. And gravity is a scientific principle, okay? And it's everywhere. I think we could agree that it's real whether you believe it is or not. Can we agree on that? And when you come in contact
step off a cliff, right?
That's right.
You don't have to even believe it, right? You can put it to the test. Step off a cliff, find it, right?
That's right. But gravity is real. Some people could say, well, you may not believe in gravity, but it's still real. And so when you come in contact with any principle, you have a couple choices. You can either, number one, align with it, or you can ignore it to your peril. Like you said, now, if I was careless with gravity, I could do exactly what you said. I could step off a cliff and get injured, maybe even die. But if I align with gravity and I respect gravity, I might use it to my advantage. I might say, you know what? I'm going to build a hydroelectric dam and use the gravity in the dam to pull the water through the dam and make millions of dollars selling electricity. Or maybe I'll build a ski resort where people can ride up a lift and have this thrilling experience pulled down by gravity. Maybe I'll build a water park or a skydiving company or a bungee jumping company. And
Nice.
so gravity could actually make you really wealthy and successful. Or, as you said, if I step off a cliff, I could get injured, maybe even have some really bad news if I ignore it. So aligning with gravity could make me rich. Ignoring gravity could make me injured or even worse.
Be devastating.
And so here's the thing, in our lives, in business, in sales, in leadership, in families, in relationships, Patrick, there are principles that are just as real as gravity, whether we believe they are or not. And we can align with them or we can ignore them to our peril. And here's the thing, Patrick, we can do anything we want in life, anything, but we do not control the consequence. What controls our consequences? Well, principles do. And if principles control our consequences, and if they're bigger than you and bigger than me, like gravity, wouldn't it make sense to figure out what they are? And so that's what we're talking about on the Principle Podcast. That's what we're talking about right now because it's so important. What are the principles that govern my business? What are the principles that govern my marriage? What are the principles that govern my family? What are the principles that govern my relationship? If I can align with them, I can figuratively build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort. If I ignore them, I can fall off a cliff.
100%. I reached over and grabbed this stick. Can you read what it says?
Oh, yes. He who picks up one end of the stick picks up the other. Yes.
Yeah, and it talks about choice and consequence, right?
So genius. If then.
Right, and I think what's the last one?
Exact obedience miracles.
Right. So I completely resonate with that. I have it sitting on my desk. I stare at it every day. It's a principle, if you will, or a truth. I refer to them as eternal truths because they don't change, right? And what's interesting is if you understand those principles that are so important in a family, they apply in business as well. They apply in other relationships. If you became a politician, they could apply as a politician. They are enduring, and they are most definitely a key to finding and developing more certainty in our lives. As you do your podcast, congratulations actually on being in the top 10%. That's fantastic. I think it's because when people hear what you're talking about on your podcast and they hear about these eternal principles, as I said, I call them, I think it resonates with them, right? It rings true. When you hear truth, you can, you don't just hear it, but you feel it, right? It's like it hits you on a different level. So much of what we talk about on this show is these principles of certainty. In fact, the first Wednesday of every month, I do a monologue. I started the first one. It's kind of funny because I had a guest who last minute couldn't get through Zoom and get on the show, and she had to cancel. She was having technical difficulties, and so with no notice, I had to do a monologue for the full hour, and I talked about certainty just off the cuff. I shared 3 principles for how to find certainty, and you can find it if you go back in my previous episodes a couple years ago. But I enjoyed it so much that I did another one in November about gratitude, and then I decided a little over a year and a half ago to start doing a monthly monologue. And going through them, I've been going through these, exactly what you're talking about. I've been going through principles of certainty. I started with accountability. I talked about balance, composure, discipline, endurance, faith, giving, humility, integrity, all these principles. And they're exactly this, right? They're principles that do not change, and they apply in multiple areas of our lives. So, yeah, it's good stuff.
I love that. Can I just say something right there? I want you to know the stuff you said that doesn't change. think about that. Like it's not the latest book. It's not the latest social media, something. It's not the latest. It's these timeless ancient principles that bring certainty, which you're so good at delivering with your business there. This timeless ancient stuff.
Yeah.
You said like humility,
100%.
integrity, those kind of things. Instead of saying, hey, it's this new tricky something or other, the new, 18 steps to how to magically do something. It's not the technique as much as it is the principle. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, they're foundational, aren't they? It's whether you're, talk about a marriage, right? You have these foundational principles that if you build upon those, it's like they say in the scriptures, Christ said, build your house on a rock, not on sand, not on shifting sand. It's a pretty good example of a principle, right? Of building on a foundation that doesn't change. Now, that's not to say that we don't change and the relationship doesn't change and evolve and grow and so forth. Just like you might have a house and you build an addition onto it or put a new roof on it. But your foundation, if it is sure, if it's solid, you can build another floor if you want to, right? Put a whole other level on the house. I mean, add a pool. There's a lot of things you can do to continue to add to it as long as you have that right foundation. So anyway, I'm speaking Absolutely. As though I'm a builder, but I'm about as mechanical as a banana peel. So don't ask me to build anything.
You and me both.
Yeah, I leave that. I'm a firm believer in hiring professionals to do what professionals do. So yeah. So let's talk about your book a little bit. It is a book that teaches principles, and it's called The Key to the Gate, right? Principles and techniques to get past gatekeepers to the decision maker. I know this is what you speak about to a lot of companies, a lot of sales teams, and so forth, among other things. But how did the book come about?
Well, let me tell you. I can tell you a story. So I had this problem with my bank account. I think you may have heard this story before. I had this problem with my bank account many years ago. And the problem, Patrick, was that I didn't put money in my bank account when I should have put money in my bank account. And I had my bank account was overdrawn. I'm sure nobody's ever been there. Anyway, my bank account was overdrawn, and I was a little anxious about it, a little embarrassed. And so I went down to the bank to figure this out. And when I went down there was a gentleman named Jeff who helped me figure out this problem with my account. And so I put the money in like I should have before. And Jeff was really kind. He waived a bunch of these overdraft fees. And so we got everything straightened out. When he was done, I looked at Jeff and I said, hey, Jeff, can I get the email to your boss? And he looked at me kind of funny, like, well, why do you want the email to my boss? And I said, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did. Thank you for taking the time to help me, for being so kind to help me waive these fees. And I went home that night and I had the email to his boss and I had Jeff's email, and I typed up a quick email that said something like this. It said, dear Mr. Branch Manager, I had the opportunity of working with Jeff. He was very professional and courteous and helpful. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion, something like that. I sent it to his boss, and I copied Jeff on the email, and I didn't think anything else about it. It took me 2 or 3 minutes to write the email, and he'd helped me. But it was really interesting, Patrick, because I came back to this same bank later on, and I'm standing in line. This is back in the days where we had to go to the bank maybe a little more than we do today. And there's let's say there's 10 people in line. I don't remember how many, but it was a significant line. And somebody came up to me, and it was not Jeff. It was not the branch manager. It was just somebody else at the bank. And they looked at me and they said, Mr. Anderson. And I got to tell you, I live in it was in a fairly decent sized city at the time. And so it wasn't typical that people knew each other's name. I didn't know this person. They apparently knew my name. They said, Mr. Anderson, can I help you with your banking? And I was a little surprised. And I said, well, sure. And they took me from the back of the line, and they let me do my banking in front of everybody else. And I mean, you would have thought I had $10 million in the bank, which we all know that I didn't, right? Well, it happened again and again and again, where I went to this bank and they treated me like a king, and I was able to do my banking in front of everybody else. And so why did that happen? I'll ask sometimes an audience, I'll say, why did that happen? And people will say, well, they all wanted a raise and a promotion like Jeff got or something, And the truth is, Patrick, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know. But it was probably something maybe he talked or maybe he said something in the break room. But if you take that and you fast forward several years later, I'm in a sales job and I'm sitting there in New York across from this high-level director in New York. And he looks at me and he says, "You are the only salesperson I've ever let into my office." And I was surprised, Patrick, because the competition was fierce for this particular product. And then he said something that was really interesting. He said, "The reason you're here," now I'm not going to tell you what he said yet. Let's back up. I'm going to ask your viewers, like, what do you think I did to get into this high-level director in New York? And I'll tell you, it was almost exactly the same thing that happened at the bank. What I did is I sent this director an email, which he completely ignored. He didn't respond. Nobody responded. Several days later, I called in to try to follow up with this email, and his secretary answered the phone, and I said, "Hey, can I speak with Bob?" And she said what all secretaries say, or most of them say many times. She said, "He's unavailable." And I said, "Well, maybe what I could do is just send the email that I'd sent last week and send it to you again. Would that be okay?" And she said, "Sure." And she said it in this kind of nice, just bubbly, fun way. And I noticed it in a helpful way. Yeah, she was just kind of cheerful. And I said, "Well, thank you." And while she was on the phone, I pulled up the email I sent before, and we chatted just a little bit. And I noticed she was one of those people you can almost hear smiling. Have you ever heard of any? Have you ever experienced that where you can't see it, but you can hear it on the other end of the phone?
Yeah.
And I said to her, I'm on the phone all day long. I just really appreciate you being so courteous and professional. Thank you. And she was a little bit surprised. She said, "Well, thank you." And as I was typing up this email to send it, I said, "I'm going to mention that to your boss." So I typed really quick and I said something like this: "Dear Bob, I had the opportunity of speaking with Janice. She was very professional and courteous. I think she's an asset to your team. By the way, I'm going to be in New York on these days." And I sent the email to Bob, copied her on it. And I said, "Hey, did that email go through?" And she hesitated a little bit and she said, "Yeah, it went through." And I said, and then she hesitated. Then there was another little pause and she said, "Hey, thank you for the compliment." And I said, "Well, I meant it." And that was it. I mean, that was I said, "Thank you I meant it. I hope you have a great day." The conversation was over shortly after that. Well, fast forward, here I'm sitting in this high-level director's office, and you just said, "You're the only salesperson I've let into my office." The thing he said next, he said, "The reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary. I talk to my secretary more than I talk to my wife, and some of these sales guys don't understand that." I thought that was interesting, Patrick. Let me tell you, he did not say it's because I had great social media. He did not say you're the only salesperson I've let in because you had this great website or you had this great marketing. He said, "You're the only salesperson I've let in because you were nice to my secretary." And so if there's one thing I want the viewers, your listeners here to maybe think about is, what was that principle that's as real as gravity? If I aligned with something and didn't ignore something, what was the timeless ancient principle that I aligned with? And I personally think it was just the golden rule. The golden rule is as powerful as gravity. If we treat people like we want to be treated and be the first to do it, a lot of times it comes back to us. And I know you're good at that. You've always shared things. You're extremely good at when you do the certainty thing, when you're giving and sharing good ideas with people. And when you do that and you're the first to do it, people automatically feel like they want to do something back for you. Now, it may not happen every time. That's okay. We're doing it because we want to. But if we can align with the golden rule, that's one of the things that helps us in business, helps us in parenting, helps us in all kinds of situations. So that was a long answer, but I thank you for the answer. I wanted to give you a little bit of context there.
No, that's fantastic. I remember you shared that story with me when we first met. We talked a little bit about the book and how it came about, and it really stuck with me because it's such a powerful principle. Right? You talk about the golden rule: do unto others as we would have them do unto us. And it's enduring, right? It doesn't just fall on deaf ears. It doesn't just go to waste. In most cases, it's going to have the results. But you made this really important point, EksAyn, that I think is worth mentioning. When she said, "Thank you for the compliment," you said, "I meant it." Right? It wasn't manipulative. It wasn't, you were trying to take advantage or trying to, kind of snake your way in and just give a false compliment, because you really meant the compliment because you really deserved it. And she recognized that. Yeah, her boss recognized it. So I think it's a really powerful principle. It's a fantastic story, what we're talking about, right? These foundational principles.
And right, and it has to be sincere, right? And think about this: what if I had ignored the golden rule and just acted like a bully at the bank? I just said, you know what? Can't believe you guys charge me so many fees. You better fix it. You better fix it now. Could I have gotten a short term result? Maybe they might have fixed my problem, but what would have happened when I came back to the bank a week later? Probably wouldn't have been treated just exactly right. And here's the point, though. You're right. It's not about manipulating. It's not about trying to get people to do stuff. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally just does those kinds of things. And then, just like gravity, we almost attract the goodness in because we're putting it out, right? And so thanks for acknowledging that. Great point.
Yeah, in fact, I'll tell you a story of my own that's kind of along those lines. I just recently experienced this. You know, we're helping with this new social media platform called VidMe, and anyone who wants to check it out, they can find it at certaintysocial.com. But I was invited to a party in LA. It was in Malibu, actually, about 3 weeks ago, and I thought, why not? You know, I can go tell people about VidMe. Maybe we'll meet some influencers. It's this amazing platform that helps content creators to really 10x and to even 100x their income, right? And it pays the fans, as you know, to share the platform. So it creates this vested interest between us. Well, I went there for that reason, right? My partner lives in Mission Viejo. We were going to go together. He ended up getting in the hospital, had to go to the hospital, so I went by myself. And during this party, I ended up sitting and chatting with this lady for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I was there all day, but we were painting and we were talking and we got to be really good friends in just this short period of time. Come to find out, her name is Seba Chavez, and come to find out she's a senior publicist with connections all over the world. She's doing a movie right now on Michael Jackson called Redemption. Her artist won 20 Grammys last year. She's very connected, and we've gotten to be really good friends. She's opening up all these doors for us, introducing us to all these amazing artists, and just introduced us to a music producer who represents 20,000 labels. I mean, and she mentioned this. She's in town last night. I just came and picked her and her assistant up at the airport and took them to a party last night, but here in Vegas. And she said it. She said something about why she has come to just appreciate me. And she says, "You took the time to get to know me. You didn't have anything." I mean, I had an agenda a little bit because I was there to share our platform, but that's not why I took 2 hours to talk with her. I was really interested in her story. And to your point, it takes a little bit extra time, a little bit of extra effort to treat people in that way, to do that golden rule. You can't be in too big of a rush. You can't be focused on just your own agenda and your own interests. You have to be focused on others. And I'm seeing results right now. I mean, she's opening up doors for us that I couldn't even imagine, right? Just because I took some time and remember that golden rule. And it's kind of cool seeing it seeing it unfold right before our eyes as you saw it happen. And you've seen it happen many times over, I know, as you're in your career, and you wrote a whole book about it, right? So we are up against our break. We're just going to do one break in the show today, but let's come back and finish this conversation. We're visiting with EksAyn Anderson. He's an author. He's a business owner. He has a fantastic platform called Dadfluence. He's even been written up in Forbes, and the list goes on. I don't think we have enough time to share all your accolades, X, but I do appreciate you being on the call. If you're listening here, don't go away. We'll be right back on Bold Brave TV.
Mike Zorich, a 3-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 6-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorich, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorich has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back to Finding Certainty. This is your host, Patrick Laing. I'm visiting with EksAyn Anderson. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's spoken all over the country and even around the world, and been written up in Forbes and several different publications, Speaker Magazine. I mean, the list goes on. But we were just talking about his book called Key to the Gate. He teaches principles and techniques for getting past gatekeepers, which is many times the biggest hurdle, right? If you can't get past the gatekeeper, get into that decision maker, doesn't matter how good your product is, doesn't matter how good your pitch is, you're going to be talking to yourself. And so much of what you speak about, X, and as you talk about, and you've written in your book, is based on these foundational principles. And I want to transition a little bit into principles regarding parenthood. Okay, let's talk about your Dadfluence platform. I called it a foundation. I guess I think of it as a foundational platform or movement because it has potential to be really to be a generational impact, to create generational effects in the lives of families and kids. And talking about principles, what principles are more important than those? So tell me how it came about. You have 5 children. I have 5 children. I know you're a dad, right? I'm sure that's a big part of it. But is there more to the story about how Dadfluence came into being?
Well, that's a great question. Probably close to a year ago, I just had this really clear moment, Patrick, where I knew that I needed to try to help fathers. Now, one of the things that I like about principles, since we're talking about it, is because, gravity works. We talked about gravity, that it works here, it works where you're at, and it works in North America and South America and Africa and Europe and Asia and North Pole and South Pole. It works everywhere. Well, the principles that work in business are the exact same principles that work in families. The principles that work in families work in business. So like I just told you this story about catching a secretary doing something which was awesome. She was being friendly. She was being professional. She was being courteous. Well, a psychologist would say, I know what you did. You positively reinforced her. What you did is you gave attention to a behavior that you liked. And because of that, she gave you more of that behavior. She was being a little bit helpful, and then she got attention for it. And then she was giving it. Now, I call it the golden rule, but psychologists they like to make it a little more complicated than it is. So they use big words like positive reinforcement. But that same principle works in parenting. Like if you can catch your kids doing something right, And a lot of times, I mean, have we ever seen a parent, the kid comes in and the parent says, I can't believe you stayed up till 3 a.m. and you didn't make your bed and you're getting a C- in your science class or whatever it is. What is that parent doing? Well,
Like
they're
bam,
kind of
bam, bam. Right?
well, they're ignoring this principle of the golden rule. And if you want to get really technical, let's get technical for a second. In psychology, they say behaviors are like seeds. If you can imagine, I have this pitcher of water in my head. Attention is like water. And I water the behaviors that I want to see grow with attention. Well, when a parent comes in and says, hey, you didn't make your bed and you didn't this, what are they doing? They're trying to get rid of bad behavior, but they're actually watering the behaviors they don't want to see grow. They're watering the weeds. And they're actually, unfortunately, because it's against the, I mean, who wants to be, let's go back to the golden rule. Let's go back to gravity. I can align with gravity and build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort, or I can ignore gravity and fall off a cliff. If the golden rule is as real as gravity, bigger than you, bigger than me, we can't invent it. And if I go in and tell my children all the things they're doing wrong all the time, I'm basically ignoring gravity. I'm figuratively flirting with the cliff. On the other hand, they found it so much more effective. If I want to shape my children's behavior, I've got to catch them doing stuff right and give them attention for it. So let me give you one example. If you look at a tantruming kid, okay, let's talk about, well, let's back up. There was this book. It was a genius book, and I think everybody should read it. It was called The Power of Positive Parenting by Glenn Latham. Great book. In fact, it's a parenting book, but I'll tell you, it's helped me in business. The principles in that book, they work in business. I've used them, okay? But what the basic premise of the book is, we've got to catch our kids doing something right, okay? We've got to water the behaviors we want to see grow with attention rather than giving attention to everything else that's bad. So I'm going to tell you one story in the book, and I hope I'm telling the story right, but in the book, they tell about this kid who was being sent to the principal's office all day, all the time. It became such an issue that they called in the school counselor to try to see what was going on. The school counselor sat in the back of this room, and she watched this kid, and the kid was doing a lot of things right. He was listening. He was obeying instructions. But as soon as he did something, but he was getting zero attention for doing what was right. He was only getting attention when he did something wrong. So as soon as he'd do something wrong, the teacher would say, oh, there you go again, and put his name on the board. And then he'd get it. Then he'd do something else wrong, and they'd give him the check mark. And then he'd do something else wrong, and he got the next check mark. And soon he had enough check marks to be marched down to the principal's office. Well, when he got there, they found he was being doubly reinforced because what happened is they put him next to this window. And when the bell would ring, his friends would come by and they'd wave at him, and he'd kind of be like, hey, and he was kind of the cool bad kid. And so he was getting a lot of attention from the teachers for doing what was wrong. He was getting a lot of attention from his peers for doing what was wrong, and getting zero or almost no attention for doing what is right, the good stuff. And the counselor said, this is kind of predictable behavior. He's not getting any attention for doing what's wrong, what's appropriate, but he gets a lot of attention when he does what's wrong. Well, I want you to think about that.
Isn't that interesting?
How much as parents do we go and give attention to the behaviors we don't want? I mean, I see parents who say, my child is tantruming all the time. But when you look at what happens, every time they tantrum, the parents is like, here, do you want a sucker? Do you want my iPhone? Do you want a lollipop? Do you want something? I'll give you some reward for tantruming. And in reality, what they need to do is spend some time with them when they're not tantruming, catching them doing something right, and then put them in a zero reinforcing environment when they are, which is like a corner, let them just burn out. Yeah. And there's strategies like that. How do I use the golden rule? Don't we all want to get attention for what we're doing right and not have people point out our bad spots? Some really quick, and I'll make this quick, Patrick, but my daughter, she knocks on my door. She's 6 years old, 7 years old. She knocks on the door and she goes, hey, Dad, I got a surprise. And I said, what's the surprise? She goes, well, I got up, I made my lunch, I got dressed for school, and I made my bed, and you didn't even have to ask me. And I thought to myself, I'd learned about positive reinforcement a little while before that. And I went to my wife and I said, you know what? Let's see if this really works. Let's give attention to this behavior. So I went out there and I said, wow, your bed looks great. And you made your lunch and you got dressed. We didn't even have to ask you. And my wife, she kind of laid it on thick too. And I got to tell you, what do you think started happening? Oh,
He
she
kept
did it
doing it.
again. That's a powerful principle. What if I had ignored that principle and I waited till she slept in, didn't make her lunch, didn't make her bed, and stormed into her room and said, now, how many times do I have to tell you to get up and make your bed? That would have been less effective and actually would have made it more likely that she would have slept in. So what we've got to be really keyed in as dads, as spouses, as business owners, as employees, anything, whatever our role is. How can I catch people doing something right? And when we do that, it's like we're building the hydroelectric dam, Patrick. It's like we're building this ski resort. And when we ignore it, it's like we're like teetering on that cliff and we might fall off. Imagine the feeling you get from standing on top of a hydroelectric dam, knowing that you're making millions of dollars selling electricity, versus the feeling you get if you're hanging onto a cliff 800 feet up and you're about to fall off. It's the exact same gravity. One of them's going to make you money. One of them might kill you, or injure you severely.
You know what X, what I keep thinking about is my youngest son. Right, my son Evan is he'll be 19 next week on the 2nd, and he's at that age where he's finding his way. Right, he didn't want to go to college like the other kids. He wants to be a fireman. He's fighting wildfires up in Oregon. He works at the ski resort in the winter up at Mount Hood, and he's just one of those guys. He loves the outdoors. He mountain bikes, he snowboards, and he cliff jumps. I mean, he's crazy, right? But I'm always getting after him for not checking in with us more often, right? He'll go on a backpacking trip or go to Summit Mount Bachelor for 3 days and not even tell us he's going there, and we have no idea where he is. We don't hear from him for 2 weeks, and I get worried about him because he's this extreme sports guy and he's out in the backcountry a lot. And I think you just taught me a lesson that could really apply, because I get after him a lot about not communicating better, but I don't really reinforce when he does check in, right? It's just like an expectation, that, man, usually I say something like, thanks for finally calling, right? Or something like that. But I think you're absolutely right. Right? It applies with our little kids, it applies with our grown children. And I was talking to another one of my team members just yesterday about how we were talking about sales and talking with customers about how every word out of our mouths either raises the walls or lowers the walls. Said, picture that you're standing outside a limousine and the window, the tinted window is scrolling up and shutting you out, or scrolling down and you have a conversation. We were talking about resolving objections and so forth and so on. But I think that applies as well. And it is another principle, right? It's another reminder for how to have that influence that we want to have with our kids or our customers or our spouse, whatever the case might be. We try really hard to do it in work and in our professional environment. We kind of forget to do it at home with our kids and our spouses a lot of the time, don't we?
Well, yes, I think we do. And one of the, I'm so glad you brought it up. We're not perfect at this, and so we can learn from it. One of the other things that I need to be better at, and that I'm hopefully getting a little bit better at, but I haven't always been, is just listening. They say when there were some studies done that shows that if you want to influence someone, one of the best ways that you can do that is just listen to them. Like sincerely, not just like just so you can respond, but actually like so that you can really feel where they're at. And when they get that you get them, in other words, that you understand them, the ability, the chances that they'll take your advice go way up. So, Stephen Covey said this in a book. He said, effective people seek first to understand before they try to be understood. There were some studies done where they were watching people talking, and they found that the person who was liked the most in the conversation was the one who was asking the most questions. The person who was enjoying the conversation the most was the one who was talking the most. And so as you're trying to influence people, asking them a lot of questions, sincere questions, just like you're doing with me on this podcast. You're demonstrating just how to do this. And then really, really listening. If you want your children or your spouse or a business associate or anybody to get more likely to go from a no situation to a yes situation, one of the best things you can do is listen to them. I read something online that said the most successful B2B salespeople talk only 43% of the time. Somebody watched it. Whereas the less successful B2B salespeople are talking like 65 to 75% of the time. So think about that.
Totally true.
The more successful ones are talking less than they're speaking. And that can help you with a sale. It could help you with a business negotiation. It could help you with parenting, with a troubled marriage. Those principles work everywhere. So it's a great point. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, I say all the time to my salespeople to remember that they have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them in that ratio, right? To your point, I think one of the most important skills that we can develop, talking about the walls going up or the walls going down, one of the most important skills is the ability to be a good listener and to be present. There's actually a book, I forget the author's name, I think it was Ken Blanchard maybe, but he wrote a book about, it's titled The Present, and he says the best present you can give someone is to be present. Not thinking about what you're going to be doing next, not thinking about what you maybe has been weighing on your mind or something in the past, but you are in the moment with that person, whether it's your child, your business owner, a client or an employer, whoever. These principles that are enduring, these principles that are foundational, I think you see some consistent characteristics in them. Number one is they're typically focused outward versus inward. Accountability. You're focused outward. You're focused on not what's in it for me, and you're not pointing fingers. You're focused on you're focused on others. How you can serve them. How you can admit responsibility or take blame if you need to, et cetera, et cetera. Another principle that I think is critical or characteristic of these principles is that they typically don't change. They don't, and we talked about this, where they don't adjust for a business scenario versus a family scenario. They are consistent. There's some application, maybe some adaptation, but the principles don't change, and they don't change over time. You talk about the new social media crazes and platforms and the latest Web3 and crypto and everything else. There's a lot of things happening and changing all the time, but these principles stay consistent. And I also, if I had to share one more principle or one more characteristic, I think they're oftentimes subtle. We talk about foundational. They're right under the surface. They're flying under the radar. They're not in your face, right? It's like a deep river that runs. It's quiet because it's deep. And so that's my nickname, by the way, River. It's I don't know if you knew that, but so we are coming up against the end of the show, though. Do you want to talk a little bit about what Dadfluence is and how it's working? And I know you have a 7-week course and so forth. Maybe you can share with the listeners.
Well, if you are interested in being a better dad, or you know of people who might want to learn some of that, it's at dadfluence.org. It's a 7-week system that gives you real ideas, techniques, principles, especially. But how can you apply those principles as a parent, as a father? It could be used by mothers as well, but it's something that is the reason I feel it's so important, Patrick, right now. If we really don't fix families and marriages, and we can do a lot of stuff in the world, politics, business, all kinds of stuff. But if we don't fix marriages and families, everything else we do, in my view, is going to be like straightening deck chairs on the Titanic. You're not going to be able to fix some of the problems if you just continually hack at the leaves. We've got to go to the root of the problem. And the root of the problems we see in our society are right here in our homes. where if we could just use a little more, like you said, be present. I love that, Patrick. That was genius. Be present with our children. Put our phones down. Be there. Teach them principles like the golden rule. Teach them principles like integrity and honesty and compassion and service and the things that you were talking about that are going to make them strong, amazing adults later on, rather than coming home and being checked into devices all day long. We don't really do anything, and we never teach these principles to our kids. And so later on, they get bad consequences, and they wonder why they're getting bad consequences because dad never told them. I mean, we've got to learn the principles and take advantage of the time that we have to mold our children as much as we can, whether they're older or younger. I mean, some people think they missed the boat. You can start today. If your children are grown, start today. If your children are young, better yet, start today. Start today to learn those. And yes, if there's for your viewers, because you've been so compassionate and good, if they just put in the word family, FAMLILY, they can just get the whole 7-week course for free. It's sold for much more than that, but if they want to just get it for free by listening here to the show, put in family, FAMILY, they can get the entire 7-week system for free.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, X. As I think about these topics, and the principles that we want to instill in our kids, I think there's 3 things we can do. We can model them, we can talk about them, talk openly, make it part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. And I also think we need to give them opportunities to model, not just model, but to follow our example, to stretch themselves. I think of an example, and one of the goals I had for my kids was that they would grow up confident. I remember being in elementary and junior high and not feeling very confident and just hating that feeling, and I wanted my kids to be confident. And so I'd put them into situations which forced them to learn those skills. I mean, I remember my 5-year-old, once we were at McDonald's, and he didn't like his Happy Meal toy. And he wanted to go back and see if they'd give him a new one. And I said, okay, go ask him. You can do it. Oh, no, you do it, Dad. I don't. But he did not like it, but he didn't want to do it. And I said, you can do it. So just walk up to the counter, tell them, see if they'll swap you out. And he said, okay. And he takes a big breath and he walks up. He's shorter than the counter, right? You can see this hand reaches up above the counter. And can you exchange my Happy Meal toy? And they were tickled to do it, right? They gave him I think they even gave him 2. And he was so excited. He came back, Dad, they did it. Look, they even gave me 2, And that was an example of helping, modeling it and talking about it, but then giving them an opportunity to learn it and learn it by doing, right? And today my kids, to their credit, I think they've all grown up and had 4 scholarship winners and 2 Division I athletes, and they're doing good things, right? So we did something right along the way, I guess. But any last thoughts you would share before we run out of time here? We're approaching the end of the show.
Well, 2 thoughts. Just addressing what you said. I love the fact that you create a situation where your child had to be brave, and you had expressed confidence in him, and then he was brave. And that's something that dads are so good at, is letting their kids do hard things, expressing confidence. And when they know their dad's behind them, that confidence comes. So my hat's off to you. The next thing,
if I may, X, and to your point, we really applauded it. I mean, we all cheered him and congratulated him and hugged him, and so we really reinforced it to your earlier point, right?
Well, and just having that voice in your head that my dad knows I can do something that's a little uncomfortable for me, or maybe very uncomfortable for me, but he knows I can do it. They hear that voice later on when you're not there, and that's something that's super important. Last thing I would say today, the truth is that the biggest principle, Patrick, the most powerful principle, is just to choose to love other people. Love, the verb, like love other people. And so if there was one thing I would tell all the viewers, and I'll share this super quick because I know we're up against the end of the show. Stephen Covey talks about this situation where somebody came up to him after a conference, and he looked at Stephen Covey and said, I don't love my wife anymore. Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, well, then love her. And the guy goes, I don't. I've fallen out of love. I don't love her. She doesn't love me. We have 3 kids. We're probably heading for a divorce. And Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, if you're not feeling it, that would be a good reason to love her. And the guy goes, well, how do you love someone you don't love? And Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, you know what? You're acting like love's a feeling. Love's not a feeling. Love's a verb. It's an action word. But if you do the verb, the feeling will follow. We can literally choose our feelings by leading them with actions. And so no matter the question, this is something my grandmother used to say. I'm going to say it to you, to your viewers here. No matter the question, whether it's a troubled teen, a troubled marriage, business problem, anything in life, love is the answer. No matter the question, that principle, it's part of the gold. The golden rule is part of it. Honesty is part of all these other like subsidiary principles. They all come back to just choosing to love others. And when you do that, things happen in business. They happen in your family. They happen in your marriage. They happen with your children. That's my final thought.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. In fact, one of the very best books I've ever read, I tell people about it all the time, is a book called Real Love by Greg Bear, Baer. I recommend every person, every couple, everybody read this book because it teaches you what real love is, how to apply it in your own life. You've got to love yourself to love others. It has a lot packed into this book, to your point. So thanks for bringing up that point. And again, if you're interested in learning more, how do they get a hold of you, X? I know dadfluence.org. Anything else you want to share?
Dadfluence.org, EksInfluence.org is my business site. Dadfluence is for the dad movements. And both of them I'm very passionate about. So thank you for letting me share, Patrick. It's been an honor to be on your show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us. I wish you all the best. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, EksAyn, and I think if we all work on it together and we create these ripple effects, I used to say ripple effects, and then I started saying mushroom effects, but it actually becomes more like a snowball effect, where it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that influence in our businesses, in our families, I think it goes beyond just the walls. It expands into the community, expands into our nation. It expands into the world and does have a generational impact. So appreciate you being on Finding Certainty. If you're listening to us, if you're a recurring listener, we appreciate your patronage. Please find us on any of the major platforms, Spreaker, Amazon. We're syndicated on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Roku TV, etc., etc. But find us, like us, share us if you would. We really appreciate it. There is certainty out there. You can find it. We can help. We wish the very best. Remember, if you want to check out VidMe, we talked a little bit about it, go to certaintysocial.com. If you want to be a better dad, go to dadfluence.org. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Take care.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the certainty experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.